Chapter 9 Scared Silent. They lived a normal life, to outsiders that is. They have 4 children, are a married, hard-working, uneducated, low-income couple. Sure, they have highs and lows like any other married couple. Their children were all born healthy and went to school daily just as they went to work daily. Tori, the mother, worked pressing clothes at a dry cleaning establishment, which pays slightly higher than Rick's job as a dishwasher for one of the local food chain restaurants. The 2 younger children were in daycare. They were only 1 and 2 years of age. The eldest 2 children were ages 6 and 8. With a large family and not much income, the couple was always stressing over something, but lately the stress levels have been rapidly increasing. Rick began yelling at Tori for any reason, such as not giving him enough meat and potatoes on his plate, or she was allowing the kids to make too much noise while he was watching television. However, Tori would stand her ground and shout back about how she could use more help around the house, until one day she raised her voice to him, and Rick smacked her so hard it sounded as if someone lit a firecracker. She could not believe her husband could do such a thing since he never put his hands on her before, and only went as far as pointing his finger closely in her face during heated arguments. She withdrew from him, but he apologized after a couple of weeks of the silent treatment and told her his stress was building up due to him working hard, long hours every day, but still feeling like he cannot get ahead. Tori forgave her husband. He once again began receiving her affection and things went back to their normal lifestyle of high stress, living check to check, 4 children to care for and getting by to the best of their ability. After several months, the stress continued to increase, and Rick escalated from shouting, pointing in her face about small issues and the one-time open-handed smack, to full-fledged physical beatings. Deep inside, he was harboring inadequacies, jealousy, and insecurities about being the man of the house, and not being able to properly provide and contribute to the household. He paid half of the already low rent, and Tori paid the other half, as well as all of the utilities, and purchased most of the groceries since Rick was unable to, due to his hours being cut on his already low-paying minimum wage job. Rick graduated high school, but had no additional education or training, and Tori dropped out of school in the 10th grade to care for her firstborn child and work. They were high school sweethearts and did everything together. Nevertheless, she was fed up with the abuse and packed up her and the children's belongings to escape to a women's shelter after the beatings became longer and harder, causing her to hide constant black eyes with makeup and explain away bruises with lame excuses to her few friends, family, and coworkers. After several weeks passed and Rick constantly leaving her voice messages and texts, Tori left the women's shelter, wanting to give it one more chance with holding her family together in fear that she will not be able to make it completely alone financially. Rick was happy to have her and the children back home and showed his remorse by helping more with the kids and around the house. He also refrained from putting his hands on her. However, that did not last very long. The frustration and depression of not being able to obtain a better-paying job continued to weigh on Rick's conscience, and the bitterness of seeing his neighbors and friends buy nice things sometimes with their extra money, others at his place of employment in different positions being able to go out to eat for lunch while he was only able to bring a pack of 50-cent ramen noodles or a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and his wife bringing in the most money even with her low-paying wage, was causing him to seethe with jealousy and anger. It only took the small comment of Tori insisting that Rick cook dinner for the family this time around, since she always does it, and since he had a little more time, being that she often worked overtime and he only worked a 30-hour work week, to set him completely off and triggered him to begin beating her again. The kids would crouch in terror near the closest corners, in the closets or behind doors during the beatings. Rick even escalated to breaking glasses and pictures in the house as an extension of his rage. Tori's family rarely came to her home since they grew to despise Rick, whose personality deteriorated over the years, and she hardly ever went to their homes except for holidays since she was busy with the kids, and her husband seemed to have a problem with it when she went to visit them too often. Rick was never very close with his family and had not visited or spoken with them in years. The kids' grades began dropping in school and they grew more frightened of their father. They no longer jumped on his back when he came home from work or asked him to play with them, and Tori felt as if she was walking on broken glass whenever she came home, not knowing when the next blow to the body, smack to the face, or piece of furniture would come flying her way. She lived in absolute terror. Despite her situation, Tori refused to call the police on Rick, especially after he threatened he would kill her once he was released from the county jail if she ever did. Tori continued to take the beatings for another 2 to 3 years before she came to the realization that she would be unalived anyway if she continued to do nothing and stay with him. The poundings were not getting any easier to take. Tori began receiving 2 black eyes instead of 1, bruises turned into broken skin, and the children were collateral damage, physically, mentally, and emotionally from the abuse. She finally built up the courage to call 911 after Rick threw a vase at her during one of their heated arguments, and it ricocheted off the sofa when it missed her, bounced up and burst across one of the children's heads, shattering to the floor upon impact. Fortunately and amazingly, causing only a few scratches on the child and a few sparkles on the forehead when the child turned towards the light until the few pieces of glass were scraped off. When the police arrived, Rick was hauled off to jail. He gave Tori this long, intimidating stare straight into her eyes without mumbling a word and barely blinking from the time was being put into handcuffs until the time he was walked down the front porch steps and pulled off in the back of the police car. Tori shivered with fear the whole time Rick was gone, feeling only a few moments of peace here and there knowing he cannot get to her. At least for now. Rick was out on bond after a few weeks when his estranged family collaborated and came up with the bail money for him. He came home to find out the house was empty. Tori, fearing Rick's promise to end her life if she ever called law enforcement, had packed up as much as she could and moved across town. She felt she could not go much further since she had little money, knew no one outside of the city, was a high school dropout, and did not want to risk losing the only job she has ever had at the dry cleaners. Tori felt slightly safe since she told no one where she moved to, and informed the 2 older children who always obeyed to do the same. However, it was not long before Rick tracked Tori and the children down after calling every single elementary school in the entire city until he was able to locate the one his children were enrolled in. Tori did not inform the school staff of what was going on because she did not want them in her business or calling the Department of Children and Family Services on her, which she knew they would likely do. Once he knew he had the right school, Rick made his way up there right before the kids were due to be released for the day, sought his 2 elementary-aged children out and secretly followed them home. Once nightfall hit, he knocked on the door, trying to apologize and talk to Tori, promising that he had changed. When she refused to open the door, he forced himself through the weakly secured front entrance and began beating her harder than he had ever beat her before, stating a partial sentence with each blow. "Punch, I told you, punch, not to ever call the cops on me, smack, and if you did, smack, I would kill you, kick." The kids were all crying and frozen with fear while watching in horror as their mother was being beaten into a bloody pulp by their very own father. Rick then pulled out a knife from his pocket and began stabbing Tori repeatedly while the kids screamed in fear, helplessly. When the oldest child instinctively ran over to grab his arm, screaming, "Daddy, stop!" he just flung the child back across the room where the others were. Rick continued stabbing Tori until her helpless body stopped moving. He then nonchalantly walked out of the door, leaving her there to die on the living room floor. A neighbor came over after hearing unceasing screeching cries from the children, and found all 4 of them curled about their mother's bloody body, shouting her name, simultaneously, "Mommy! Mommy!" The next-door neighbor called 911. Tori was hauled off on a stretcher, and after hours of trying to revive her, she incredibly survived the brutal assault and spent months recovering in the hospital's ICU. Social workers placed the kids in foster care until family members came forward volunteering to care for them while waiting for Tori to be released. Following her discharge from the medical center, a few months later, Tori was able to return to work and eventually reunited with her children. As time passed, she noticed the eldest sister and brother had not spoken a word for days and was also told by her family that they had not spoken to anyone, not even each other, since they were in their care. However, the 2 youngest children were back to running and playing around like nothing happened. Tori figured that the silence was due to the trauma and believed they would be fine in a few more weeks once they see they are safe and no longer have to fear their father since his bail was too high to afford and he was facing over 25 years in prison for attempting to end her life, assault, breaking and entering, and child endangerment. The following school year, Tori and the children's teachers noticed that Rick Jr. and Zaria, the 2 eldest of the 4, were still not uttering a single word. Social services referred the children to a psychologist. During the sessions, they did not speak with the psychologist, only shaking their head, yes and no to certain questions and writing down answers if they were asked something. The psychologist, Dr. Grintz, observed enough from the children to come up with a diagnosis. She informed Tori that Rick Jr. and Zaria's conditions are referred to as selective mutism, and it is often caused by severe trauma, which is an extreme form of control for a child who can control so little else. However, Dr. Grintz further explained how the children will usually speak again in situations which they feel comfortable, but it will be at their own pace and time frames, which can sometimes take months or years after witnessing such acute trauma as they have. This information gave Tori hope for her children, and so she went on with life as normal as she could in such a situation, and the family adapted to the circumstances. Several years passed. Zaria and Rick Jr. eventually went on to high school and were placed in special classes since they still were not speaking. After graduating high school, there was still no progress. Their social and daily living skills had ceased developing. Tori eventually put the two now young adults in an assisted living facility that catered to those who are unable to function normally in society completely on their own. Zaria and Rick Jr. are currently in their mid-30s now, and to this very day, have never uttered another single word since the horrific incident they witnessed as children, which almost caused the ending of their mother. The two younger children progress fine, but have since moved out of their hometown, never to return, and have not seen their siblings since they were placed in the adult facility. Words of wisdom: please leave when faced with any form of domestic violence. One never knows how it will escalate, and people underestimate the lasting emotional and psychological damage it can cause. Additionally, children who witness domestic violence in their households are more likely to grow up and abuse or be abused.